It started as an ordinary morning in the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Or so it seemed. The sunlight streamed through the ornate windows, bouncing off polished marble floors, glinting on golden fixtures that had witnessed centuries of history. But behind the grandeur, tension simmered. A decision was being made, one that would shake the very foundations of the royal family. A decision that nobody expected. And yet, by the end of the day, it would leave two of Britain's most famous princes excluded from one of the most powerful roles in the monarchy, the Councilor of State. Yes, you heard that correctly. Prince Harry, Prince Andrew, excluded from a role they once assumed was practically guaranteed to them by virtue of birthright. But why? How did the palace, the institution that thrives on tradition and continuity, suddenly turn its back on them? And what does this mean, not just for the princes, but for the monarchy, for the public, and for the delicate web of power in London? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine, for a moment, being told that a responsibility you believed was yours, something tied directly to centuries of tradition, is suddenly taken away. There's no warning, no negotiation, no compromise. Just a quiet note, a subtle gesture, a decision made in hushed tones behind closed doors. The weight of that moment is unimaginable. And yet, this is exactly what happened. Now, before we dive into the specifics, let's set the stage. The Councilor of State is no minor position. When the monarch is out of the country, incapacitated, or otherwise unable to fulfill royal duties, Councilors of State are empowered to act on their behalf. They can sign official documents, perform ceremonial duties, and, in some cases, make decisions with implications that ripple across the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. In other words, being excluded from this circle is not merely a personal slight. It's a signal of diminished authority, trust, and, in the eyes of many, relevance. For Prince Harry, the exclusion might have felt like a delayed consequence of his break from royal duties and public controversies. For Prince Andrew, it was a bitter reminder that scandals from the past never truly fade. But the real story is more layered, much more intricate. And that's what makes this tale not just a headline, but a study in power, family, and public perception. The first question that comes to mind is this. Was this exclusion purely a reaction to past controversies, or was it part of a carefully orchestrated strategy? The palace is not a place where decisions are made on impulse. Every action, every announcement, every subtle shift in protocol is meticulously planned. Advisors weigh public reaction, political implications, and, perhaps most importantly, family dynamics. So, if Harry and Andrew were excluded, it wasn't just a spontaneous act of discipline. It was a deliberate move. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Rumors have already begun swirling, whispered in the back corridors of London tabloids and echoed in social media feeds. Some insiders suggest that certain members of the royal family quietly lobbied for the exclusion, concerned that giving the two princes authority could create internal conflicts or embarrassments if past controversies resurfaced in the public eye. Others hint at a more constitutional angle, questions about whether either prince, under the current circumstances, truly fit the criteria for Councilor of State responsibilities. And yet, there's an undeniable human element in this story. Picture Prince Harry, who has spent years under intense public scrutiny, grappling with the media, lawsuits, and personal drama, only to find that a role once assumed as a birthright is now out of reach. And Prince Andrew, whose reputation has been persistently challenged in public forums, suddenly confronted with a reminder that past mistakes carry consequences, even in royal corridors. The psychological and emotional stakes here are immense. It's not just about protocol. It's about perception, trust, influence, legacy. Excluding these two figures from such a position sends a message, loud, clear, and impossible to ignore. Your role, your birthright, your influence is conditional. And conditionality, especially in the rigid world of royalty, can be devastating. Now, some of you might be wondering, what about Prince William and other senior royals? How do they fit into this equation? The dynamics of family loyalty, competition, and public image all collide in moments like this. And when decisions of this magnitude are made, every reaction, public or private, ripples through the palace walls. The allies, the skeptics, the advisors, the courtiers. All of them become part of a chess game that very few outside the palace can fully grasp. And speaking of outsiders, the public reaction is another layer worth examining. Britain has a long history of scrutinizing its royals. Every move, every decision, is dissected in newspapers, social media threads, and late-night discussions. For the general populace, this isn't just a minor adjustment in royal roles, it's a spectacle. Questions arise. Is the monarchy protecting itself from potential embarrassment? Is it punishing perceived disloyalty? Or is it asserting authority in a way that subtly reshapes the hierarchy of influence within the family? This story is not merely about exclusion. It's about power, legacy, and the way modern monarchy interacts with centuries-old tradition. And it's unfolding at a moment when public attention is fierce. Social media, 24-hour news cycles, and relentless paparazzi mean that every move, every subtle gesture, every official statement is amplified tenfold. What once might have been quietly decided behind palace walls now has the world watching, analyzing, and judging. So, what really triggered this decision? Was it a single incident, a calculated series of missteps, or a slow accumulation of tensions? That's the question that drives the intrigue. And over the course of this video, we're going to peel back every layer. From private conversations in gilded rooms to leaked documents and insider accounts, we'll explore the forces, both visible and invisible, that led to one of the most dramatic exclusions in modern royal history. And just when you think you've understood the stakes, consider this. History shows us that when royal authority is challenged, when family dynamics shift, and when public perception is at play, nothing is ever straightforward. One decision can cascade into multiple, often unexpected consequences. Allies can become opponents, controversies can escalate, and reputations can be irreversibly altered. By the end of this story, you'll understand not just why Prince Harry and Prince Andrew were excluded, but the ripple effects this decision is having across the monarchy, the media, and public consciousness. But right now, in this very moment, the palace corridors remain tense. A decision has been made. A line has been drawn. And the two princes find themselves on the outside looking in, an exclusion that will haunt conversations in royal circles for years to come. So I ask you, if the monarchy, an institution built on tradition and hierarchy, can make such a bold move, what does it say about the balance of power, loyalty, and trust within the royal family? And more importantly, what comes next for Harry, Andrew, and the monarchy itself? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine holding power that can shape the course of a nation, even when the king himself isn't present. It sounds like a privilege reserved for kings and queens alone, but in Britain's monarchy, there's a role that carries extraordinary authority in moments when the monarch is temporarily unavailable, the Councilor of State. And yet, for all its significance, the public knows surprisingly little about it. What powers do these councillors wield? How does someone become one? And more importantly, why would being excluded from this position send shockwaves through the royal family and the entire nation? The Councilor of State is a role rooted deeply in tradition, codified by statutes that stretch back over centuries. When the sovereign is unable to perform duties, whether due to illness, travel, or any other reason, councillors of state are empowered to act on their behalf. They can sign official documents, approve legislation, and even carry out ceremonial functions. They become, in essence, the monarch's hands when the monarch cannot act. It's a responsibility steeped in trust and lineage, reserved for those deemed not just capable, but loyal, discreet, and politically astute. Now, here's the fascinating part. You might assume that any senior royal automatically qualifies. Not so. There are specific requirements. Typically, councillors are senior members of the royal family, over the age of 21, and, critically, are not disqualified due to scandal or legal complications. In practice, it's more than a formality. It's a measure of the royal family's judgment and the public's tolerance. And it's precisely this fine balance of power and perception that makes the exclusion of Prince Harry and Prince Andrew so dramatic. Let's break it down further. Imagine the monarchy as a centuries-old clockwork machine. Each gear, each wheel, must fit perfectly. The councillors of state are among the largest gears, the ones that keep the clock moving even when the central mechanism, the king, is temporarily unavailable. Excluding a gear doesn't just stop it from moving. It changes how the entire clock functions. For Harry and Andrew, this wasn't a minor oversight. It was a seismic shift in their ability to influence royal affairs, even temporarily. Now, consider the historical precedent. Councilors of state have often stepped into pivotal moments, sometimes making decisions that affect legislation, foreign diplomacy, and national ceremonies. Their signatures and actions carry weight. This isn't ceremonial fluff. It's substantive authority. And here's the irony. While the public often focuses on the glamour and scandal of royal life, very few understand the gravity of exclusion from this role. It's not just symbolic, it's functional. Harry and Andrew weren't just left out. They were effectively sidelined from a core aspect of royal power. So, what does it mean to wield this authority in modern Britain? It's not merely signing papers. Councillors have been called upon to approve crucial state documents, to represent the crown in sensitive negotiations, and to maintain the continuity of governance. For a prince, being granted this role is both an acknowledgement of maturity and a recognition of trust. Being denied it, especially after years of public service and expectation, sends a clear message. Your judgment, your actions, or perhaps even your very reputation are now considered insufficient for this level of responsibility. But here's where it gets even more compelling. Exclusion from this role doesn't just affect the princes. It sends ripples across the entire monarchy. It alters public perception, shakes internal hierarchies, and subtly but undeniably shifts power to those who remain inside the circle. When two high-profile figures are suddenly left out, the palace insiders, the advisors, and even the press notice. It becomes a statement, a silent, potent declaration about who holds trust, who is deemed reliable, and who is temporarily or permanently on the outside. Now, let's address the human angle. Imagine Prince Harry, who has navigated the stormy waters of media scrutiny, public criticism, and personal loss. He's a man familiar with exclusion in many forms. Yet, this one cuts differently. It's not tabloids writing rumors. It's the monarchy itself, the very institution he once served with loyalty, signaling that certain doors are now closed. Similarly, Prince Andrew, whose past controversies have long been fodder for public debate, faces a stark reminder that some reputational stains are indelible when it comes to wielding official royal power. And yet, despite all this, there's a nuance often overlooked. Being a Councilor of State isn't just about the individual. It's about timing, context, and optics. The monarchy is hyper-conscious of public sentiment. Every appointment or exclusion carries dual implications: internal family trust and external political perception. In this light, the decision to exclude Harry and Andrew wasn't a mere family spat. It was a calculated act, weighing history, law, public opinion, and the delicate balance of trust within the royal family. Consider this. What if this exclusion was not only about past scandals or perceived rebellious behavior? What if it was also a strategic move to consolidate authority elsewhere? Within the royal family, power dynamics are complex, often opaque to outsiders. By shifting the composition of councillors, the palace can subtly influence succession dynamics, loyalty networks, and even the flow of information. Every exclusion sends a ripple, every appointment signals trust. And in this carefully choreographed ballet, Harry and Andrew suddenly found themselves on the outside, watching decisions unfold without influence. And here's a surprising fact many overlook. The Councilor of State can act with legal authority almost equivalent to the monarch. In some cases, their approval is needed for legislation to be enacted. They can represent the monarch at critical international events, and their decisions can impact political processes, ceremonial protocol, and public policy indirectly. To lose access to this power is not symbolic. It is a tangible diminishment of agency. For the two princes, it wasn't just a status change. It was a removal from the operational heart of the monarchy itself. Now, you might be wondering, who remains as councillors? How does this change the internal balance? By excluding Harry and Andrew, the authority consolidates around a smaller, presumably more trusted circle of senior royals. The remaining councillors gain influence by default. Every decision, every document, every ceremonial act now flows through a network that excludes two prominent voices. And the implications aren't trivial. In a family where perception is everything, Exclusion is a form of communication as loud as any public statement. And while we focus on power and protocol, let's not forget the emotional stakes. Harry and Andrew are not just functionaries. They are sons, brothers, uncles, and public figures whose personal identities are intertwined with their royal roles. The palace is a crucible of history, expectation, and scrutiny. Being cut out of a core function of the monarchy is both professional and deeply personal. It sends a message that trust, once lost, is not easily regained, even for those born into privilege. But the drama doesn't stop there. Because when you look closer, the timing of this exclusion is anything but coincidental. It comes amid a period of heightened public scrutiny, political sensitivity, and internal family recalibration. Every media outlet, every commentator, and every royal insider began speculating about the reasons. Was it Harry's outspoken interviews, Andrew's legal entanglements, or something more subtle, something hidden in the palace's corridors, whispered among advisors, never meant to leave the walls of Buckingham Palace? The Councilor of State role, therefore, becomes a lens through which we can view the monarchy's evolving power structure. It's not just about titles or ceremonial duties. It's about influence, legacy, and who the institution trusts to act on behalf of the sovereign. Exclusion, then, is a statement. It says, you may be a prince, but in this moment, you are not entrusted with the keys to authority. And that's a reality that carries consequences far beyond the palace gates. And here's the most compelling question. If the monarchy can make such a sweeping move, what does this tell us about internal family dynamics? About trust, loyalty, and the balance between public perception and private judgment? For Harry and Andrew, this moment is a stark reminder that birthright alone does not guarantee power. Every action, every misstep, and every public perception counts. And in the case of Councilor of State Roles, the stakes could not be higher. But what came next would change the understanding of this exclusion entirely, and no one outside the palace could have predicted the cascade of consequences that followed. To fully grasp why the exclusion of Prince Harry and Prince Andrew is such a seismic event, it's important to consider the symbolism embedded in the Councilor of State role. Beyond the legal authority, there is a public perception element that cannot be underestimated. Every appointment, or exclusion, sends a subtle but unmistakable message. It tells the public who is trusted, who is in favor, and who is effectively sidelined. In a monarchy that is both an institution and a living, breathing family, perception is power. The councillors act as the king's proxy when he cannot fulfill his duties. They are, in essence, the monarch's extension. Whether signing legislation, opening parliament in the king's absence, or attending high-profile engagements, these royals represent not just the crown, but the very continuity of the institution. To be excluded is not simply to lose a role. It's to be denied the ability to act as a linchpin in the monarchy's operations. It's a message that resonates far beyond the palace walls. Consider the historical weight of this authority. In the past, councillors of state have made decisions with national significance. During periods when the monarch was overseas or incapacitated, these appointed royals signed treaties, approved state spending, and even performed duties that shaped public perception of the monarchy. Imagine the headlines if one of these decisions went poorly, or if a councillor mishandled their responsibility. The weight of accountability is immense. And this is precisely why trust is paramount. Harry and Andrew, despite their prominence, were deemed unfit to carry such responsibilities, a decision that has rippled through royal circles like a shockwave. Now, the public often sees the monarchy as a world of glittering ceremonies, lavish balls, and historical pageantry. But beneath the surface lies an intricate web of power, trust, and expectation. The Councilor of State sits at the center of this web, acting as both representative and guardian of royal authority. To be removed, or excluded, is to experience a profound shift in position within that network. Suddenly, influence diminishes, access is curtailed, and authority is suspended. It's a nuanced form of power play, invisible to many, but deeply felt by those directly involved. And here's the twist. The Councilor of State role is as much about loyalty as it is about competence. It is not just a title. It's a measure of the monarch's trust in a family member's judgment, discretion, and alignment with the institution's values. Exclusion, then, is more than procedural. It is a signal of distrust. Harry, with his high-profile departures from royal duties, media interviews, and public critiques, had already tested that trust. Andrew, burdened by legal controversies and reputational concerns, presented a different challenge. Yet in both cases, the palace's decision was clear. These two princes could not, at this time, be trusted with the authority that comes with councillor status. The implications extend even further when you consider how this affects public perception of the monarchy itself. Every royal appointment is scrutinized, every omission dissected. The exclusion of high-profile princes sparks endless debate. Is the monarchy maintaining standards? Or is it engaging in internal politics that may appear petty to the public? The balance is delicate. The institution must appear firm yet fair, traditional yet modern. By sidelining Harry and Andrew, the palace sent a message that accountability, reputation, and trustworthiness are non-negotiable, even for those born into privilege. Moreover, the ripple effects are felt inside the family. Royals who are trusted with councillor status gain influence and visibility. Those excluded may feel diminished, powerless, and even humiliated. In a family where hierarchy and protocol are everything, the difference between inclusion and exclusion can redefine relationships. Alliances shift, tensions rise, and the excluded, no matter their fame or public support, must navigate a new reality. Their capacity to act on behalf of the monarchy is curtailed, their public influence reduced, and their access to decision-making networks effectively blocked. Yet despite the seriousness, there's also an element of irony. Both Harry and Andrew are figures constantly in the media, constantly in the public eye. They are famous for their actions, their statements, and their visibility. And yet, when it comes to the practical exercise of royal power, signing documents, approving legislation, representing the king, they are excluded. It's a paradox that underscores the difference between public persona and institutional trust. Fame does not equal authority. Celebrity does not equal power within the monarchy. And in this instance, exclusion from the Councilor of State role made that reality crystal clear. Another factor to consider is the ripple effect on governance. When a Councilor of State is absent or excluded, their duties shift to others. This concentration of responsibility on fewer individuals alters internal dynamics and decision-making processes. Those who remain in power gain disproportionate influence, shaping decisions and engagements in ways that may have long-term implications. For the excluded princes, this isn't just a personal setback. It's a shift in the operational balance of the monarchy itself. And then there's the psychological angle. Imagine Harry, a prince who has consistently battled public scrutiny, now confronted with institutional sidelining. Imagine Andrew, whose controversies have been widely publicized, facing a stark reminder that the monarchy operates not on public opinion alone, but on internal assessments of trust and suitability. These exclusions are not just bureaucratic. They are deeply personal, impacting identity, self-perception, and family relationships. The palace may act with detachment, but the human cost is palpable. Now, let's ask a provocative question. What does it take for a royal to be deemed unfit for Councilor of State duties? Is it misbehavior, bad judgment, or the perception of scandal? Or is it a more subtle calculus, blending personal history, public perception, and internal family politics? The palace does not issue explanations for these decisions. Silence is often the policy, leaving room for speculation, conjecture, and rumor. And that silence, in itself, is a tool, deliberate, strategic, and sometimes devastating. Historical context also adds depth to this narrative. Throughout British history, exclusion from royal duties has often been a precursor to larger shifts. Royals who were sidelined sometimes found themselves permanently distanced from influence. Sometimes, the exclusion served as a warning to others, a reminder that privileges are conditional, reputation matters, and the monarchy will act decisively to protect its image and operational integrity. For Harry and Andrew, the exclusion is not just a temporary measure. It is a marker of a changing hierarchy, a signal to the family and the public about who is trusted and who is not. And the stakes extend beyond the palace. The monarchy exists in a delicate relationship with the government, the media, and the public. Decisions made internally about roles, responsibilities, and exclusions are watched, analyzed, and interpreted. The exclusion of two high-profile princes doesn't merely affect the family. It influences public trust, political perception, and international attention. The monarchy is an institution that thrives on continuity and stability. Any disruption, especially one involving figures as prominent as Harry and Andrew, threatens to challenge both. But perhaps the most fascinating element is the timing. The exclusions did not occur in isolation. They coincided with a period of intense media scrutiny, public debate over royal finances and influence, and internal recalibrations within the family. Every palace insider, advisor, and loyalist had to weigh the potential fallout. Every move was strategic. And the princes? They were left on the sidelines, their authority curtailed, their ability to act diminished, and their place in the monarchy's operational structure fundamentally altered. So when we ask why this matters, the answer is clear. Exclusion from the Councilor of State role is not a minor procedural adjustment. It's a statement about trust, authority, and perception. It reshapes the balance of power, alters family dynamics, and reverberates through public consciousness. And for Prince Harry and Prince Andrew, it marks a turning point, one that will influence their relationship with the monarchy, their public roles, and perhaps even their legacy. And just when the implications seemed clear, the palace made another move that no one could have predicted. A ripple that would set off a chain reaction, drawing in family members, advisors, and the public in ways that were as dramatic as they were unprecedented. But what came next would push the monarchy and the princes into territory none of them had anticipated: Prince Harry. Just hearing his name evokes a whirlwind of images. The teenage royal with tousled hair and a mischievous grin, the soldier fighting in distant lands, the outspoken son challenging royal norms, the media magnate whose every move is dissected. But what does it mean to be a rebel prince in a family built on centuries of tradition, hierarchy, and expectation? And more importantly, how did that rebellion play into one of the most dramatic exclusions in modern royal history? The removal from the Councilor of State role? Let's begin with the obvious. Harry was never meant to be ordinary. Born into the royal family, his life was scripted by expectations, protocol, and public scrutiny from the very first breath. Every smile, every wave, every public appearance was a note in a symphony he didn't choose. Yet, from a young age, Harry carved a space for himself, challenging norms and pushing boundaries. A teenage rebel in the palace corridors, he wasn't content to simply follow the rules. He wanted to shape his own path, even if that path sometimes clashed with tradition. But rebellion has consequences. In Harry's case, those consequences were magnified by the relentless gaze of the media. Every misstep, every private incident, every statement made in jest or frustration was amplified and scrutinized. The palace, ever mindful of public perception, began to take note. Advisors whispered, courtiers debated, and somewhere between youthful defiance and public scrutiny, a pattern emerged, a pattern that would later be cited, at least unofficially, as evidence that Harry might not fit the mold required for a Councilor of State. Consider Harry's military service. On the surface, it was a testament to his dedication, courage, and commitment to duty. But even here, the story was complicated. Deployments, media coverage, and public appearances were often fraught with tension. He served with distinction, yet the narrative presented to the public was a mix of admiration and sensationalism. The very qualities that endeared him to some, courage, independence, a willingness to act, also set him apart in ways that unsettled the royal institution. To be trusted with the Councilor of State role requires more than bravery. It requires absolute alignment with the monarchy's expectations, discretion, and an unwavering adherence to protocol. And Harry, by his very nature, tested those boundaries. Then came the interviews, the documentaries, the public critiques. Harry, along with Meghan Markle, made choices that further distanced him from the royal institution. He spoke openly about mental health, family tension, and his struggles within the palace. He criticized elements of royal life and the institution that raised him. For the public, these revelations were gripping, intimate, raw, and, at times, shocking. For the monarchy, they were disruptive. Every candid comment, every exposé, was a reminder that Harry's alignment with royal expectations was no longer guaranteed. Now, think about the irony. Harry's life has always been public. Yet the Councilor of State role requires discretion. Every action must be measured, every decision carefully considered, because missteps have consequences not just for the individual, but for the monarchy as a whole. Here was a prince whose very persona, outspoken, independent, media-savvy, made him simultaneously appealing and potentially destabilizing in the eyes of the institution. His exclusion, then, was not necessarily punitive. It was strategic, a recognition that authority requires alignment with expectations that Harry, by temperament and experience, could challenge. And let's not forget the emotional dimension. Harry is not just a public figure. He is a son, a brother, a husband, and a father. His relationships within the family are layered with love, loyalty, and tension. Being excluded from a role so central to royal responsibility is more than bureaucratic. It is personal. Imagine the internal conflict, loyalty to the family, respect for tradition, and yet a growing desire to assert independence and autonomy. That tension, visible in interviews, speeches, and public appearances, made his exclusion from counselor duties both understandable and emotionally charged. It's also essential to consider the timing. The exclusion didn't happen in a vacuum. It came after years of careful observation, public incidents, and ongoing scrutiny of Harry's behavior. Each interview, each public statement, each choice to step back from traditional duties added to the calculus. Advisors, historians, and royal insiders likely debated the pros and cons extensively. Could Harry be trusted to wield authority in moments of national significance? Or was his public persona too unpredictable, too intertwined with personal narratives, to allow for that level of responsibility? The answer, in the eyes of the palace, was clear. Yet, despite the exclusion, Harry remains a public figure of immense interest and influence. His every move, whether charitable work, public speeches, or media appearances, commands attention. That influence, however, is informal, external, and outside the formal mechanisms of royal authority. In other words, while Harry can inspire, advocate, and capture global attention, he cannot act in the capacity of a counselor of state. The distinction may seem subtle, but in the corridors of power, it is profound. Influence without authority is visibility without control, and Harry now occupies precisely that space. And there's another layer worth examining: public perception. Harry's supporters view him as a principled rebel, someone willing to challenge an institution that demands conformity at the expense of personal well-being. Critics, however, see a pattern of defiance that undermines traditional authority. For the monarchy, which must navigate both tradition and contemporary expectations, Harry's high-profile persona complicates the question of trust. Exclusion from the counselor role can thus be seen as both a protective measure for the institution and a calculated message to the public and the family. Authority is conditional, and rebellion has consequences. Interestingly, Harry's personal narrative adds dramatic tension to this exclusion. He is simultaneously a son of privilege and a man defined by personal struggle. His mental health advocacy, military service, and charitable work illustrate responsibility and compassion. Yet his public critiques of the royal institutions signal independence that, while admirable to some, may conflict with the requirement of absolute alignment needed for counselor duties. This duality, competence and rebellion, service and defiance, is precisely what made the decision to exclude him so complex and, ultimately, so newsworthy. Now, consider the family dynamic. The monarchy is, at its core, a family business with centuries of tradition and expectation. Decisions are influenced not only by law and protocol, but by relationships, trust, and loyalty. Excluding Harry from the Councilor of State role sends a message to other family members as well. Even birthright is not enough. Trust and alignment with institutional expectations are paramount. In other words, the exclusion is both a personal and systemic signal. And here's the twist that few outside the palace have considered. While Harry's exclusion appears punitive, it may also serve as a protective mechanism. In times of national stress or crisis, counselors must act with discretion and impartiality. By excluding Harry, the monarchy reduces the risk of a high-profile figure acting in ways that might inadvertently create controversy or media storms. In this sense, the decision is as much about managing institutional risk as it is about disciplining an individual. Yet, for Harry himself, the exclusion is undeniably a blow. It challenges his identity, his legacy, and his perceived place in the royal structure. It forces a confrontation with the limits of his influence, highlighting the tension between public visibility and institutional authority. And in a family as historically scrutinized as the British royal family, this tension is magnified exponentially. But just when it seemed Harry's path had been clearly defined by exclusion, unexpected developments began to emerge. Private discussions, subtle palace maneuverings, and insider insights suggested that his story was far from over. The public may see a prince sidelined from authority, but behind the palace doors, a different narrative was unfolding, one filled with intrigue, strategy, and emotional stakes that no headline could fully capture. And just when Harry thought he had fully grasped the implications of this exclusion, a decision would be made that nobody anticipated, a move that would not only redefine his role, but send shockwaves throughout the entire royal family. Prince Andrew. The mere mention of his name evokes a complex mix of public fascination, scandal, and controversy. Unlike Harry, whose rebellion is often framed as principled and personal, Andrew's public image has been marred by allegations, legal entanglements, and high-profile controversies that have shadowed his royal life for decades. But how does this long history of scandal tie into his exclusion from the Councilor of State role? And what does it reveal about how the monarchy balances reputation, power, and family loyalty? Let's start with the facts as they are publicly known. Andrew, Duke of York, once celebrated as a dedicated royal, military veteran, and figure in public service, saw his reputation take a steep decline over time. From his military career in the Falklands to his patronages and charitable work, Andrew had long been in the public eye. But his associations, particularly the highly publicized relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and related legal challenges, created a cloud that no amount of royal protocol could easily clear. In the palace, reputation is currency, and Andrews had been devalued in the eyes of both the public and, perhaps more crucially, internal advisors who must assess trust and suitability for roles like Councilor of State. Being a counselor is not about personal charm, popularity, or even military service. It's about trust, absolute, unwavering trust. Advisors, historians, and constitutional experts weigh the potential risks of appointing someone whose past actions could trigger scandal, international criticism, or public outrage. Andrew, for all his past contributions, presented a liability. The monarchy, ever conscious of both optics and institutional integrity, could not afford to grant him authority that might, if mismanaged or criticized, reflect poorly on the institution itself. And so, exclusion became a calculated decision, not merely punitive, but protective. Now, consider the psychological and emotional dimensions. For Andrew, the exclusion is deeply personal. He is a man born into privilege, accustomed to authority, influence, and expectation. To be sidelined from a position of formal power, especially one tied to legal and ceremonial duties, is not merely symbolic. It is a reminder of limitations imposed by reputation. In public, he remains a royal figure, entitled to titles and visibility. But operationally, in matters of state, he is suddenly a spectator, watching authority pass to others deemed more reliable or less controversial. The consequences of Andrew's past scandals extend beyond personal reputation. In the delicate ecosystem of the royal family, one member's missteps ripple outward, affecting relationships, trust, and public perception of the institution. Advisors and the king himself must balance familial loyalty against institutional stability. Exclusion from the counselor role becomes a statement. Family bonds are important, but they do not outweigh the requirement of discretion, trust, and public confidence. Andrew's exclusion thus communicates both internally and externally that while he remains a royal, his ability to act officially on behalf of the king is restricted. And there's another layer often overlooked: the global lens through which the British monarchy operates. Andrew's controversies are not confined to the UK. They have attracted international attention, legal scrutiny, and media coverage spanning continents. For the monarchy, every action, or inaction, by a senior royal is amplified worldwide. By excluding Andrew from the Councilor of State role, the institution signals prudence, discretion, and risk management. It's a safeguard, ensuring that authority is vested only in those whose actions will not jeopardize the crown's credibility, domestically or internationally. Interestingly, Andrew's situation contrasts sharply with Harry's. Harry's exclusion stems from rebellion and public criticism, a mix of principle and defiance. Andrew's stems from perceived liability, controversy, and a tarnished reputation. Yet in both cases, the palace decision communicates the same message. Authority within the monarchy is conditional. Status alone is insufficient. Trust, alignment with institutional expectations, and the ability to act without causing public or political fallout are non-negotiable criteria for inclusion. It's also worth considering the internal dynamics. Royals operate within a hierarchical and tradition-laden family structure. Exclusion from a councilor role is not just administrative, it alters relationships. Siblings, cousins, and advisors observe, interpret, and respond to these decisions. They send signals about power, influence, and favor. Andrew, despite his seniority and long-standing role in the family, finds himself sidelined. Others within the monarchy gain relative influence. Hierarchies subtly shift, and in a family where every gesture is observed, documented, and sometimes leaked, these shifts carry both practical and emotional weight. Public perception adds another dimension. The media is relentless in covering Andrew's controversies. Social media amplifies opinion, often blending fact, rumor, and speculation into viral narratives. Every royal decision now interacts with this public perception. By excluding Andrew, the monarchy manages risk, projecting stability and prudence while maintaining internal order. But for Andrew, the exclusion is a public acknowledgement that past controversies are not easily overcome, no matter the lineage or titles held. And then there's the legal context. Councilors of state can act with authority when the king is absent. Decisions they make carry legal weight, impact governance, and symbolize continuity of power. Anyone appointed to this role must be above reproach, at least in terms of potential legal and reputational exposure. Andrew, with ongoing scrutiny and unresolved questions in the public and legal arenas, becomes a potential flashpoint. Inclusion would risk institutional credibility. Exclusion, therefore, is both defensive and strategic. Yet, the emotional sting cannot be ignored. Andrew is more than a public figure. He is a family member. His exclusion signals not just a limitation on authority, but a redefinition of his role within the family's operational structure. It is a subtle, yet profoundly impactful, reshaping of influence. And while the decision may be rational and institutional, the human element, embarrassment, frustration, and perhaps even resentment, cannot be understated. And here's a critical insight. Exclusion from councilor duties does not diminish Andrew's public profile entirely. He remains a duke, a figure of interest, and a media focal point. Yet, authority and visibility are no longer synonymous. Influence is now largely symbolic, filtered through public appearances rather than institutional power. The distinction is subtle, yet it transforms the way he interacts with the monarchy, the media, and the public. Now, layer in the contrast with other senior royals. Those who remain in councilor roles gain both influence and visibility. Decisions, public engagements, and ceremonial duties pass through their hands, consolidating authority and reinforcing the hierarchy. For Andrew, this means stepping back, relinquishing direct influence, acknowledging limits imposed by past actions, and confronting the reality that even royal status cannot override institutional prudence. And just when it seemed the implications of Andrew's exclusion were fully understood, insider whispers began to circulate. Rumors of private meetings, palace advisories, and subtle power plays that suggested this was more than a simple risk management decision. The narrative hinted at larger dynamics at play, alliances forming, influence shifting, and a strategic recalibration of royal authority. Andrew's exclusion was not merely a personal setback. It was a catalyst for broader restructuring within the monarchy itself. The stage was now set for a tension-filled environment, where both Harry and Andrew found themselves outside the formal mechanisms of power. Two princes, each for different reasons, sidelined at a moment when public attention was intense and internal family dynamics were delicate. The message was unmistakable. Authority is earned and maintained, not inherited. And while the public might focus on scandal or rebellion, the palace operates on a deeper calculus: trust, discretion, and alignment with institutional expectations. But just as the exclusion seemed definitive, hints of a larger story began to emerge. Leaks, private correspondence, and insider accounts suggested that the decisions were only the beginning. Behind closed doors, forces were moving that would reshape the monarchy's power structure in ways no one could have predicted. And for Andrew, the next revelations would be as shocking as they were consequential. King Charles III. The name itself evokes centuries of tradition, responsibility, and expectation. For decades, he was the heir apparent, preparing to inherit a crown steeped in history, protocol, and scrutiny. But ascending to the throne doesn't just mean donning a crown and waving to crowds. It also means making decisions, some of them quiet, some of them seismic, that shape the monarchy, influence the nation, and even redefine the legacy of the family itself. And the exclusion of Prince Harry and Prince Andrew from the Councilor of State role is one such decision: deliberate, calculated, and undeniably consequential. From the outside, palace decisions often appear sudden or reactive. A statement, a minor adjustment, an exclusion from a role, all can be misconstrued as impulsive. But nothing in the monarchy, especially under Charles, is done without careful consideration. He has spent decades observing, learning, and navigating the intricate web of family dynamics, public expectation, and constitutional authority. Every decision is a chess move. Every omission, inclusion, or statement carries weight, often far beyond what the public perceives. Consider the nature of this specific decision. By excluding Harry and Andrew from the Councilor of State role, Charles was not merely responding to past controversies or public perception. He was strategically managing the distribution of power within the royal family. Every councillor represents not just authority in the absence of the king, but trust, loyalty, and alignment with the monarchy's vision. By removing two high-profile princes, Charles effectively concentrated authority in the hands of those whose loyalty and discretion he could rely on without question. It was, in every sense, a calculated move. To understand this fully, you must grasp Charles's philosophy as king. He is a monarch deeply aware of public scrutiny and political expectation. Unlike previous centuries, where decisions might be made with absolute internal authority, the modern monarchy operates under intense public, media, and governmental observation. Each action must balance tradition with optics, authority with public perception. Excluding Harry and Andrew was not merely a family matter. It was a statement to the nation, a signal of institutional stability, and a reinforcement of the monarchy's standards of trust and conduct. And yet, this exclusion was not without risk. Harry's global fame, combined with Andrew's notoriety, meant that any action concerning them would be dissected by the media, debated in social circles, and analyzed in international news. Charles knew that this decision would generate headlines, social media chatter, and endless speculation. But therein lay the calculation. The monarchy could manage the optics better by acting decisively than by appearing indecisive or reactive. In other words, exclusion was both protective and strategic, a move designed to reinforce authority while minimizing potential fallout. Now, let's delve into the psychological dimension. For Charles, every decision regarding family members carries immense emotional weight. He is, after all, a father, a son, and now a sovereign responsible for an institution larger than any single individual. Excluding Harry and Andrew was not merely administrative, it was personal. It required weighing familial bonds against institutional integrity, loyalty against prudence, and sentiment against strategy. The calculus is complex. Missteps could provoke resentment, erode trust, and create fractures in a family already navigating public scrutiny and internal tension. Here's an intriguing angle. Charles's approach to the councillor exclusion reflects a pattern in his leadership style. Throughout his public life, he has shown a preference for measured, deliberate decisions. Rarely impulsive, he evaluates long-term consequences and anticipates public and private reactions. In this instance, every possible outcome was considered: the public's response, the media narrative, the internal family dynamic, and the precedent it would set for future generations. This wasn't an arbitrary act. It was a precise, intentional maneuver designed to uphold authority and protect the institution. At the same time, the decision sends subtle signals to the remaining royal family members. Authority is contingent upon trust and behavior. Even high-ranking royals are not exempt from scrutiny or accountability. By excluding Harry and Andrew, Charles underscores that privilege alone does not guarantee responsibility. Influence must be earned and maintained, not inherited. It's a reminder that the monarchy, while rooted in tradition, is ultimately governed by principles of loyalty, discretion, and alignment with the institution's values. The timing of this exclusion is also telling. Charles assumed the throne at a moment when public attention was high, scrutiny intense, and expectations immense. Decisions made during this period are amplified. Every action is interpreted as a signal about how he intends to lead. Excluding two prominent princes early in his reign establishes a precedent. The monarchy under Charles will prioritize institutional stability and trust over familial bonds or public sentiment. It is a declaration of authority, both internally and externally. But the calculated move is not purely about exclusion. It also involves the redistribution of responsibilities. With Harry and Andrew sidelined, other senior royals gain influence. Their authority is reinforced, and the operational center of the monarchy is more tightly controlled. This creates a network of trusted counselors capable of acting decisively in the king's absence, a network less susceptible to controversy or unpredictability. The move is strategic in the truest sense, minimizing risk while consolidating power where it can be most effectively exercised. Yet, Charles also had to manage potential backlash. Both Harry and Andrew command attention and possess supporters, both within the family and among the public. The risk of resentment, public criticism, and media scrutiny was significant. To mitigate this, the decision was presented with careful attention to wording, protocol, and optics. Leaks were minimized, statements crafted with precision, and advisors briefed extensively. Every detail was considered to ensure that the monarchy appeared firm, fair, and deliberate. And this is where the intrigue deepens. Insider accounts suggest that the exclusion was not solely Charles's decision. Advisors, constitutional experts, and senior family members likely had input. While ultimate authority rests with the king, the complexity of modern monarchy requires consultation, debate, and strategic alignment. What appears to the public as a unilateral act is often the product of collective deliberation. And in this case, that deliberation produced a result with far-reaching implications. Two princes removed from positions of authority, signaling both control and caution. Consider also the emotional stakes for Charles himself. He is a monarch stepping into the weight of history, responsible for maintaining continuity while asserting his own vision. Decisions like this are fraught with personal and political consequences. Excluding Harry and Andrew was necessary to uphold trust and safeguard the institution, yet it also carries the risk of family tension, public speculation, and long-term resentment. Balancing these forces requires both strategic acumen and emotional intelligence, a delicate act that few outsiders can fully comprehend. The calculated move also reverberates in unexpected ways. By sidelining Harry and Andrew, Charles reinforces the perception that authority is earned and maintained, not inherited. It sends a message to younger royals and potential successors. Privilege does not guarantee trust. Actions, judgment, and loyalty matter. The implications extend far beyond the immediate exclusion, shaping expectations, hierarchy, and behavior within the royal family for years to come. And just when it seemed the scope of this decision was fully understood, whispers began circulating about additional measures, subtle adjustments, and behind-the-scenes maneuvers designed to reinforce the king's authority. Advisors quietly restructured roles, communications were carefully managed, and strategic appearances were planned to underscore the shift in influence. The exclusion of Harry and Andrew, while dramatic on its own, became a pivot point for a broader consolidation of power, visibility, and control. But what came next would reveal that Charles's calculated move was only the beginning. Behind palace doors, dynamics were shifting, strategies evolving, and the monarchy itself bracing for the consequences of a decision that no one outside the inner circle could have fully predicted. Behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, not every decision rests solely with the monarch. The public often imagines a king or queen making choices in isolation, guided only by instinct or royal intuition. The reality is far more complex. Royal advisors, those shadowy figures who operate quietly but decisively, play a monumental role in shaping policy, guiding protocol, and even influencing the distribution of power within the family. And in the case of Prince Harry and Prince Andrew's exclusion from the Councilor of State Roles, advisors and government influence were not just peripheral, they were central. Imagine a world where every word, every gesture, every appointment is scrutinized. The monarchy, after all, exists under a microscope, both domestically and internationally. Advisors act as interpreters of that scrutiny, translating public sentiment, legal constraints, and political nuance into actionable guidance. They advise on which moves will bolster the monarchy's image, which could spark controversy, and which are necessary for long-term institutional stability. For Charles, Harry, and Andrew, these advisors were not just background figures. They were key players in a chess game with enormous stakes. Take, for example, the structure of royal advisory networks. Senior courtiers, legal experts, communication specialists, and constitutional advisors form a web of influence that ensures decisions are measured, strategic, and aligned with both tradition and contemporary expectations. These advisors don't simply execute the monarch's orders. They shape the choices, anticipate consequences, and sometimes even challenge recommendations to ensure that every angle has been considered. In other words, what appears as a royal decision is often the result of extensive deliberation, debate, and strategic insight. When it came to the Councilor of State exclusions, advisors likely provided detailed assessments of both princes. Harry, with his outspoken interviews and global media presence, represented a potential risk in terms of unpredictability. Andrew, with his ongoing legal and reputational challenges, represented a liability in terms of public and political perception. Advisors would have analyzed these risks meticulously, weighing not only the individual characteristics of each prince, but also the broader institutional implications for the monarchy. And let's not overlook the role of government. The monarchy may be independent, but it does not exist in a vacuum. Constitutional advisors and officials within the British government maintain a watchful eye over royal appointments, especially those with legal authority, such as the Councilor of State. While the government does not dictate internal royal decisions, it provides counsel, insight, and perspective on potential legal and political consequences. Exclusion from councilor roles is therefore not purely an internal family matter. It also involves careful consideration of the monarchy's relationship with Parliament, the judiciary, and the broader constitutional framework. Here's where the intrigue deepens. Insiders suggest that these decisions were not made overnight. Multiple meetings, consultations, and briefings likely took place before the final decision was announced. Advisors presented data, reviewed historical precedents, assessed media impact, and even simulated potential scenarios. Every possibility, positive, negative, and unforeseen, was considered. And the outcome? 2 princes excluded, signaling a deliberate, measured strategy rather than impulsive action. Think about the human element for a moment. Advisors are not mere functionaries. They are custodians of trust, gatekeepers of reputation, and interpreters of complex interpersonal dynamics. Their input can shape the trajectory of a prince's career, influence the public narrative, and even protect the monarchy from internal conflict or external scandal. In this case, their assessments would have been critical in framing the risk versus reward calculation for including or excluding Harry and Andrew from the councilor role. And yet, this influence is a double-edged sword. Advisors must balance their loyalty to the monarch with the long-term health of the institution. They provide guidance, but the ultimate decision rests with the king. This dynamic creates tension. Advisors can advocate for caution, highlight potential threats, and recommend exclusion, but they must also navigate the personal consequences for the individuals involved. Harry and Andrew, both senior and high-profile, are not merely royal functionaries. They are family members. Every recommendation has emotional, relational, and political weight. Let's layer in the media factor. Advisors are acutely aware that every decision will be scrutinized by journalists, commentators, and social media users. A single misstep, an overlooked detail, or a poorly communicated decision can spiral into controversy. In the case of these exclusions, advisors would have anticipated questions, prepared messaging, and devised contingency plans to manage both domestic and international perception. Their role is not just advisory. It is protective, strategic, and essential for maintaining the monarchy's credibility. And there's another aspect that often goes unnoticed: the historical precedent. Advisors are deeply familiar with past exclusions, appointments, and internal royal conflicts. They draw lessons from history, identifying patterns that may repeat and outcomes that can be predicted. In advising on Harry and Andrew, they would have considered how similar situations were handled, what risks materialized, and how public perception evolved. This historical lens adds depth and caution to the process, ensuring that decisions are informed, deliberate, and defensible. But what about the interplay between advisors and the government? While the monarchy is independent, advisors often act as liaisons to constitutional officials, providing guidance on what is permissible, advisable, and strategically sound. They may consult with legal experts, review legislation, and analyze precedent to ensure that every move aligns with constitutional requirements. In other words, the decision to exclude Harry and Andrew was not made in isolation. It was part of a broader matrix of institutional, legal, and political considerations.